Teach me about the Great Lakes. Teach me about the Great Lakes. Welcome back to Teach Me About the Great Lakes, a twice-monthly podcast in which I, a Great Lakes novice, ask people who are smarter and harder working than I am to teach me all about the Great Lakes. My name is Stuart Carlton. I work with the Illinois Indiana Sea Grant, and I'm joined today by absolutely nobody. That's right. What a sad day. Due to hurricane-related stuff, I've had trouble getting everything scheduled. Lots of things are happening at the last minute. And so it's just me and our guest today, an intimate conversation one-on-one. And for those who did reach out, incidentally, everything is fine with my family in the hurricane. They are without power. It will be cool when they get power, literally. I would not like to be stuck in New Orleans in a house with no power, but that's the choice you make. So thank you to those of you who did ask. I appreciate that. Let's see, a couple of announcements before we get to our interview. Number one, don't forget about the Lakeys, right? We've had a number of Lakey nominations. This is our end-of-year award show that we are calling quite possibly not the least prestigious Great Lakes-related awards ceremony podcast. And we want you to nominate things. We have all sorts of, science communication of the year, science research of the year, Great Lakes related, of course, and, sandwich of the year, donut of the year, the most important stuff, all the most important categories we have. So please go to bit.ly.com/Lakeys21 to nominate things for the Lakeys. And I'll put a link in the show notes to that. And with that, normally I would feature a Lakey nominated item right now, but we're just going to go quick and dirty today because there's a lot happening. So I encourage you to do a nomination instead. And let's go straight to our guest. Here we go. Our guest today is Jillian Farkas. She is the Great Lakes Piping Plover Coordinator. Oh, yes, and a fish and wildlife biologist at the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. Jillian, how are you today?
I'm doing pretty good. Thanks for having me.
Oh, thank you so much for coming on. So we're here today to talk about piping plovers. And so let's start with the basics for those like me who don't really know anything about them. I'm not much of a birder. So what is a piping plover? How would you like to describe a piping plover to those out there who are listening in the theater of the mind?
Yeah, so a piping plover is a small shorebird that typically it's smaller than a robin, but it's bigger than a chickadee. It's definitely smaller than one would expect for a shorebird. They're kind of sand colored to blend in with their environment. And during the breeding season, which we see in the Great Lakes, they all have a dark band between their eyes, and they kind of have a pronounced orange beak and orange kind of tinted legs, as well as a band around their neck. And so a lot of folks sometimes get them confused with killdeer, which kind of exist everywhere a lot in urban environments, but they're kind of in the same genus. And so they're similar. They're both plovers in the plover family, but killdeer tend to have a couple more stripes. They're a little bit louder and have a bigger eye compared to piping plovers. But if you're on the Great Lakes, we'll probably see both. So
I'm looking at a picture of these now, and they're cute, right? That's one thing you didn't say, but they're cute little birds.
They're very cute, especially in person, especially when the chicks are hatched and running around the beach. Everyone says that they're little cottonballs with toothpick legs, and you can't really go wrong. So as soon as you see them, your heart kind of melts, and they're adorable. So if you're able to go out and see them, I highly recommend it.
Yeah. Okay. And so, so if people do want to see them, so they spend the summer here before going south. Is that right?
Correct.
This all got started, incidentally, because I read an article about some Chicago plovers in the Chicago Tribune, which we'll talk a little bit more about later. But so this is like one sign that the summer is ending. The kids are back in school. It's quieter at home, which is nice. But the sad part is no more piping plovers, right? So when they migrate, I'm curious about migrating birds. I don't know a lot about them. Like, do they go to the same place or kind of the general same region? How does that work?
So our Great Lakes birds, for the most part, will go down to the Gulf of Mexico or the Carolinas, but occasionally we have a bird or two that will go down to the Bahamas or Cuba or even the Yucatan Peninsula in Mexico. We only have 75 pairs in the Great Lakes, so we don't have a whole lot of Great Lakes birds. But what's exciting is there's a couple different distinct populations. And so there's a Great Plains population. We have the Great Lakes population, which is the smallest and the only one listed as endangered. And then there's the Atlantic Coast population. And so the Atlantic Coast population and the Great Lakes population will kind of overwinter in similar areas, but we can tell them apart because Great Lakes birds, for the most part, all of them are banded, and they have a unique band, an orange flag that indicates that it's a Great Lakes plover compared to an Atlantic Coast plover, Atlantic Coast plover. And so we're able to get those reports from birders and different partners and collaborators from where we're seeing them. And so we've seen them at an island in South Carolina. A big stopover point or a big wintering site for us is Cumberland Island in Georgia. We have a lot of piping plovers that go there. We have Tybee Island in Georgia, Outback Key in Florida, Dauphin Island in Alabama. Monty, who's one of the Chicago plovers, is in Galveston in Texas, and his mate is in Florida. That's why it's always a great united story when they come back to Chicago. They're overwintering in different locations, but they're able to reunite back in Chicago. So it's always fun to be able to track them and see where they end up.
These are all my old stomping grounds. I got my master's at the University of Georgia, my PhD at the University of Florida, and I've been to Dauphin Island, all this stuff. So it's fun to hear that.
No, you didn't see piping plovers when you were there. What were you doing? School? Come on.
I might have seen them. The thing is, a piping plover could land on me and say, hello, I'm a piping plover, and I would not know, at least until today. But so I don't get that. So they overwinter kind of disparately, but then they come back to the same place. Is that... I guess that makes sense. If they overwinter, if each individual bird overwinters at the same place and then comes back to Chicago or wherever, kind of the same place. Is that how it works? So they'll have basically one place on the coast or on the south and one place up here on the Great Lakes?
So Francie might be able to speak a little bit more to this, but typically they'll come back to the same breeding site, but it's not a guarantee. I would say maybe 85-90% of the time they'll come back to the same spot, especially if they have success. But if they don't have success the previous year, then they might start exploring a different area. So there's no guarantee that they're going to go back down to the same wintering area. I think it's just if they have a good time there, the food's right, they can also jump around from site to site. I think one of our birds, I think, is currently in Georgia, but I think that he might head over to the Yucatan. So typically we can just see him bounce around, but it's really great. I always get nervous when some of our key birds like Monty and Rose, if they don't come back to the spot. So I always keep my fingers crossed and hope in late April or early May that we see them come back. But
so you mentioned that these are endangered. That actually sounds kind of challenging, right? Because the Great Lakes population is endangered, but the other isn't, the Atlantic population. But the Great Lakes may disperse over to the Atlantic. Is that kind of so they're listed under the Endangered Species Act, I assume. And so is that kind of a mess for regulators or policymakers, whoever on the coastal states or developers, frankly? Is that kind of a headache to deal with the two different populations in one geographic region?
So when they're in the wintering grounds, it's kind of an odd predicament where the endangered Great Lakes piping plovers just kind of get classified as threatened. So they lose their endangered status in the winter, but they get it back in the summer up in the Great Lakes. So it really doesn't it's a unique case for sure. But typically in the breeding season, we're not having overlap between the Atlantic coast or the Great Plains. And so it doesn't cause too many headaches. I think up in the breeding range, we do have a few instances throughout the tenure of the recovery that we've had an occasional pair meet up. Our star-crossed lovers from Atlantic coast and a Great Lakes plover bird will come together and have a nest out of the blue. That's very uncommon.
That's funny, star-crossed lovers. So speaking of star-crossed lovers, we have Monty and Rose in Chicago. And so these are the big, as far as I can tell, the big celebrity plovers. And so how did this celebrity come to be? Why are they known exactly? So
it's really exciting where Chicago didn't have piping plovers nesting there for over 50 years. And then in 2019, so they did have some at Waukegan, they've had that in the past, but Chicago itself, they didn't have a pair in over 50 years. So in 2019, when they did nest, it was so amazing to get all of the support and all the dedication. There was thousands of volunteer hours in a season to watch and monitor these birds and just to make sure that they had the best kind of opportunity for success. And it was just great because you don't think about an endangered bird in a downtown city. And so the fact that they're able to nest and survive and thrive really is just kind of a passion story, or you get to really get involved and get to know these these birds, and all the birds have their own distinct personality. And so it just makes it that much more sweet when they do succeed, because you're putting all this time and effort into it. And it's the underdog story. They're not necessarily supposed to succeed, or they've had a rough go about it. So when they do, it just makes it a cause for celebration.
Yeah. Chicago is not exactly ideal plover habitat, I guess, right?
Well, it is. I mean, they have a lot of wide beaches that allow the piping plovers to nest, and it's definitely unique. Or they pop up in places that you might not expect. We have a site in Michigan, which is one of the only, like one of two places, I think, in the United States that has ORV capabilities on state property. And so they have a huge ORV dune complex at Silver Lake State Park. And we have piping plovers that nest there. And there you can hear ORVs and people going up and over dunes, and yet somehow we're able to fledge piping plover chicks, or that they enjoy it.
So ORVs are off-road vehicles, right?
Correct.
Yeah, which is super fun, but not necessarily the most environmentally friendly thing you can do.
Correct. Yes.
That was actually a big moment for me. I remember as a kid, I used to really hate jet skis because, especially back then, they were really dirty and they would pollute the water and all that. And then I got on a jet ski, and it refined my view of environmental issues, I think, is what I will say. So I imagine the same is true with ORVs. So who gets to name these things? Well, Monty and Rose, presumably their parents did not name them, or if they did, I feel like the story would actually be a little different with the English-speaking birds. But so who gets to name these suckers, or these beautiful, cute cotton balls on matchsticks or whatever?
Yes. So it kind of depends on the region. So informally, so Fish and Wildlife Service itself, we do not name the birds. We appreciate partners that want to name the birds. It makes it a little bit easier to refer to them. But sometimes we have some internal names because each of the birds get a unique band combination. And so sometimes it's a red band, or it's a blue, orange, blue band. And so then that's called Bob, or we'll call him Bob or her Bob. Or if it's a little or a light blue band, so then we'll call it Little Bob because it'll be a lowercase b. So they kind of have sometimes informal names that we're able to refer to them. Or there's a Wisconsin bird with two red bands, and so they call her red because two R's next to each other. So there's some kind of informal naming to it. But like with Chicago, they had brought together a kind of naming panel, or just trying to reflect the community, to try to represent the strengths of Chicago. And so we weren't involved in that, but we always love seeing what the community comes up with, and seeing where those fledglings end up.
I guess you worry, or maybe you don't, but do you worry about like anthropomorphizing a little too much, or is it just in good fun, I guess?
So it is a mix. And I think it depends on the wildlife biologist. So I am so grateful when people want to get involved and kind of name these things. And it is sad when we do lose a piping plover that gets so much support behind it. But I think that just highlights how important recovery is and what kind of obstacles we're coming up against. So it's unfortunate when we lose this bird that has this lovely name, or that we've been watching for a while, but it just goes to show how hard it is to spend months breeding in the Great Lakes and traveling 1,000+ miles away to the wintering ground and trying to come back and thrive and avoid predators and people and the stress. And so I guess maybe it's not the best thing to anthropomorphize them, but it helps us connect with wildlife.
I love it personally, but I understand why, it's hard. But no, you're right. Then it on the other side, when something happens, it can be kind of rough, I guess. But so you mentioned that, there are obstacles and threats. And so you say there are about 75 breeding pairs, I think you said?
We had 74 breeding pairs this year. We had 72 technically breeding females. Some of them swapped partners if they lost a partner due to predation or some other issue, but it's more than what we had last year. We only had 64 pairs. And
are these counted by volunteers? How do you know these numbers anyway?
It's a big effort. So that's why I really love this program, where we'll have federal, state partners, tribal partners. We have volunteers. We work with universities. We work with zoos. We work with just eBird observations. And so everyone's really coming together to try to monitor these birds. So typically some of the sites like Sleeping Bear Dunes, they hire a small staff to monitor these birds because they kind of are the stronghold for the population currently. They have 30+ pairs there this season, which is almost half of what our whole population is. And so being able to get daily reports about the plovers, or being able to put up an exclosure, which is just kind of a metal frame that we put over the nest to try to discourage predators and try to protect the plovers when they're vulnerable and incubating. So it's really a huge effort to go about this. And so with Chicago, we had a huge volunteer effort, and as well as Ohio this year, we had an astounding effort to really watch these piping plovers. And they had 2-hour shifts between 6 a.m. and 10 p.m. to just really have a full idea of what was going on. And so we get a lot of information from those reports.
Oh, that's great. And so what are the threats? So whenever I hear endangered species, I always assume it's a habitat issue. Is that the case here, or are there other threats that are of concern?
The reason why we think some of the numbers got as low as they did is in the early 1900s, some folks would, in general, with birds, they would take them for their feathers, for decorations, so for hats and what have you. And so piping plovers are pretty dependable in going to the beach. So they kind of were an easy target. So I think that historically there used to be 500 to 800 pairs, and they're only nesting around the Great Lakes. And so they weren't super huge, or there wasn't a ridiculous amount of pairs before they started declining. And so it just makes each pair that much more important. So between wanting to have birds in museums or having been killed for meat or for fancy feathers, we lost a bunch in the beginning. And then once we had different legislation go through between like the Lacey Act, the Migratory Birds Treaty Act, they kind of stopped piping plover loss by hunting. But like you were saying, there's just been continued habitat loss, especially after the wars. People were building a lot along the coast and just getting hardened beach development, which made it harder for piping plovers to have habitat to nest. So we got down to about a historic low, I think, of 17 pairs at the time of listing. And we've just been slowly but surely moving the needle towards recovery.
Yeah. When was 17 pairs? When was it listed, I guess?
It was listed in 1986.
Okay. So since then, 17 to 75, I don't know, what's that, about 5 times as much? A little less than that. So we're getting there, I guess. And the trajectory you said is upward?
Yeah, it's definitely increasing, and it just depends. With most wildlife trends, the population can fluctuate due to environmental conditions in a given year. So last year we didn't have as many, but that also may have been due to the pandemic. We didn't always get our people out there. Our Canadian partners weren't able to get out to the beach until June, and a lot of the nesting takes place before June to be able to put out those exposures. And so
so there's a lot. The error bars on the count last year or in 2020 a bit higher. How about this year? Was a little better, I guess, because of vaccines and stuff, hopefully?
Well, we were just able to get I think vaccines helped. We kind of knew what to expect or how we were able to do housing for some of these sites and different capacities. And so we kind of knew a little bit about, I guess, what we were doing. And this year, I think also what contributed to our success is we had lower lake levels for the first time in the past couple of years. I think that allowed for us to have less washouts, us to have more habitat available. So it was really great to see.
Excellent. I never thought about how water levels can affect that. We've done a couple shows on water level stuff, and I'll put links to those in the show notes. But that's really interesting. Oh, and you can find the show notes at teachmeaboutthegreatlakes.com/39, the number 39, because this is episode 39. So I'm already in love with piping plovers. I did not know they existed last week, but now they're cute. They've got adorable names, some of them, but many out there still to be named. And it's like a good story. So if I want to go help, or if our listeners want to go help with piping plovers, what's the best thing they can do? Is it working on hardened shoreline issues? Is it helping with these counts? Is it voting? Well, don't tell people how to vote. We both work for the government. But what is the deal? How can people best help?
So I think it's really great. You don't have to be a biologist to be involved with science. There's so many different citizen science apps. We're reporting it to our Great Lakes Piping Plover website, or on eBird. We'll typically start to see it, so we can start to see where are piping plovers in April. Are they coming, and kind of when to expect different nesting. But in general, when they're here breeding, people and wildlife can share the beach. And as long as you're kind of keeping your distance, you can still walk and fish and kayak and just enjoy being a beachgoer. But just respecting, I guess, the space, or sharing the shore is kind of what we really try to emphasize. And a lot of times people want their pets to enjoy the beach, but sometimes dogs and other animals can go after birds or harass birds or cause stress. So we We appreciate when folks have their dogs on leash at beaches, especially where piping plovers are occurring. And then just in general, by reducing your food waste, I guess, that you leave at the beach, because that can attract other like mesopredators, like raccoons or possums that can target piping plover nests. And so so if you can minimize your trash, that's also great. And just supporting wildlife conservation and encouraging your neighbors and friends just to also appreciate piping plovers. They're easy to fall in love with. Have a picture on your phone, say this amazing thing. And if you ever see monitors at the beach, we're typically more than happy to show you in our scope, like, this is what we're looking at. This is why it's special. It's so rare to be able to have an endangered bird in your backyard, and just being able to share that with people and the excitement. It's always, it's rewarding.
That's really wonderful. Well, this is fascinating information, and I really appreciate you sharing it with us. But that's actually not why we invited you here on Teach Me About the Great Lakes today. The reason we invited you to teach me about the Great Lakes, need more coffee, is to ask you two questions. The first of which is this. If you could choose to have a great donut for breakfast or a great sandwich for lunch, which one would you choose?
I knew that there was a secret reason I was invited on this podcast. I would definitely choose a donut. And so there's a donut place in Lansing called Strange Matter. It's technically Strange Matter Coffee. If you need to look at some good donut pictures, I recommend looking at their Instagram, but they are phenomenal. And I have to stop myself from going there every day.
So when I go there, right, normally our next question is, where should I go? But you, being a go-getter, have already given me that information. So when I go to Strange Matter Coffee, I'm going to get the coffee, obviously.
Perfect.
What donuts should I get?
So this might be controversial,
Good.
but I love their lemon lavender donut.
Lemon lavender.
It's just like a nice yoga day in your mouth. It's just relaxing and you just can't go wrong. But some people are saying lavender tastes like soap. I don't want to be associated with those people, but I really enjoy that.
Yoga day in your mouth. There we go. Lemon lavender. That's I'm in. I don't know when I'll be in Lansing next, but I will. And so the second question, this is actually a new version. We change up our second question every now and again when I get bored with the old version.
Okay.
And so you are the first person so you've got, it's a blue ocean, wide open.
Blue Great Lakes, I think, actually, not oceans.
That's right. It's Blue Lake. Good. Such a solid point. Would you like to host the show? I feel like maybe we'd be better off. Okay, good. Is there a special place in the Great Lakes like that? What's a special place that you know in the Great Lakes you hold dear to your heart that you like to share with our audience?
So I know I should probably say a piping plover spot, and there's so many great places. Sleeping Bear is always a treasure, but I really enjoy the Upper Peninsula and in the Porcupine Mountains that kind of butts right up against Lake Superior, especially in the fall. It's just so peaceful, and there's so many different kind of hiking localities, and you just get a great view of the water. And I just don't think you can go wrong really anywhere along the Great Lakes. So that just is a special place in my heart.
There we go. That sounds beautiful. I'll have to check it out next time I'm up on the UP.
Yeah.
Fantastic. Well, Jillian Farkas, fish and wildlife biologist with U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and of course the Great Lakes Piping Plover Coordinator. Where can people go to find out more about the work that you do, piping plovers, and so on?
So we have a website called greatlakespipingplover.org. So pretty easy to remember, but also if you want to look at our Fish and Wildlife Service website, you can look at fws.gov/Midwest/East Lansing/TE/PIPL for Pipple. So super rolls off the tongue, easy to remember. But
that's what the show notes are for. It's fine.
So both of those places, you can learn a lot more about piping plovers and how to help conserve them.
That is perfect. Well, Jillian Farkas, thank you so much for coming on and teaching us all about the Great Lakes.
Thanks for having me.
So I'd never heard of piping plovers, and I was glad to hear about them because they are cute. They do look like little killdeer, and it's an interesting story. Hopefully we'll see those numbers continue to go up. And that's going to do it for us this week. Make sure that you do the likes and the subscribes. I haven't asked you to do that in a while. Hey, could you leave a review? Maybe leave a review. If you want to leave a 5-star review. If you want to leave a lower star review, that is your right, but I recommend you do a different podcast. Do that for a different podcast rather than this one, but we'll see. Anyway, Teach Me About the Great Lakes is brought to you by the fine people at Illinois Indiana Sea Grant. We encourage you to check out the great work that we do at iiseagrant.org and also at ILIN Grant on Facebook, Twitter, all your different social medias. Teach Me About the Great Lakes is produced by Hope Charters, Carolyn Foley, Megan Gunn, and Reedy Miles. The increasingly busy Ethan Chitty is our associate producer and our fixer. Our super fun podcast artwork is by Joel Davenport. Joel, we're missing you. I hope you're coming back soon. The show is edited by the awesome Quinn Rose, and I encourage you to check out her work at aspiringrobot.com. If you have a question or a comment about the show, send us an email. teachmeaboutthegreatlakes@gmail.com. Or, leave a message on our hotline. That is 765-496-IISG for Illinois Indiana Sea Grant. I think that's 4474. You can also follow us to the show on Twitter at Teach Great Lakes. And so thank you so much for listening. And of course, keep grading those lakes.